Hi there, I'm Jake. Welcome to the Blind Eternities Tavern, and welcome to an idiot's guide to cEDH. Because see, I really like playing cEDH. These are all of my cEDH decks in front of me, but also, I'm an idiot. And I want to talk about how you can get started in playing cEDH too, even if you too are an idiot. So pull up a chair and have a seat at the table. And whether you're a button mash hack and slash controller bash, or a meeple moving mastermind of maps, mats, and minis, if you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack pick attack number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Jake. Let's talk game. So I think the first question that comes to mind when we talk about getting started with cEDH is, why would I even want to? Because Commander is an extremely diverse format, and you can play kind of whatever you want. So why would you constrain yourself to only running the most powerful, most tuned deck you possibly can, limiting yourself to just a relatively small selection of commanders that are viable in the format? And I think it's an extremely valid question. I think there's a lot of people that won't find a lot of joy in the competitive side of cEDH. But I will say there's one unique aspect about cEDH that is head and shoulders above all of the other brackets. And that's that you never need a rule zero conversation. Everybody is on the same page. If you have a mismatch in power level, that comes down to deck construction and deck piloting. There is no more conversation that needs to be had at the outset of the game. During the game, there's a lot of conversations that take place about how you manage the different steps and the different choices that people make. There's a lot of negotiation and politicking, but I think that ultimately that can show up in every level of Commander. But in cEDH, because there's no limit on the way that you build your deck or the social conventions of the way that you play your deck, it's a much more freeing experience from a player perspective. You're not constrained by the earliest turn you can win on. There's no bad blood if you are running an extremely toxic commander, and you can combo off at your first opportunity, just with the understanding that if you get shut down and your deck doesn't have a chance to do its thing, well, part of that's probably user error. I really like cEDH from the perspective that you get to use some of the best, most broken cards from all of Magic without the game feeling lopsided. No matter what you are trying to do, your opponent has an answer in their deck somewhere. And vice versa. You're running a few responses and answers, and sometimes that answer is just go faster. But that creates a fairly balanced metagame. So if you're looking to try something different, if you want to get into that competitive mindset, step away from that early negotiation before the game even begins, cEDH is a kind of fun place to start. And if you are looking to get started, the first step is choosing a deck. Now, I use the term choosing a deck fairly specifically, because when you are playing cEDH, especially if you're just getting started, it's a little bit different than building a regular commander deck. Typically, when you're building for commander, you're looking at a specific commander or a specific interaction that you want to facilitate, and you craft a deck around it. But if you are just getting started with cEDH, I highly recommend that you just pick one. Find an archetype that works for you, find something that you find exciting, and then make that deck. Proxy it out. cEDH is the most proxy-friendly format out of any other commander bracket. Pretty much everybody that's playing competitive is more interested in the gameplay aspect of commander than any sort of gatekeeping of the cards themselves. So if you want to build a cEDH deck, find something that suits you and then proxy that deck and make sure. Before you start buying into it, it's an extremely expensive format to own in paper. But let's take a step back and talk about what different deck archetypes mean. Because when I say a control deck, This is still a control deck that has a potential to tutor for Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation and win on turn 4. And it's a control deck that can still very handedly attack your opponent down from 40 to 0 in only a few turns. Just because you're playing a combo deck doesn't mean you aren't completely laden with counterspells and interaction that you can use to stop your opponent every turn of the game. And just because you are playing this weird, esoteric, off-the-wall deck doesn't mean you aren't still running all of those old standard fetch lands, mox diamonds, and everything else that goes into a black-green cEDH deck. There's a lot of commonality between cEDH decks, and the specific flavor of that deck is going to vary in intensity depending on how myopically your deck is focused on that strategy. And ultimately, that's why it is so important to test. Not only pick a deck that you think suits you, but confirm that that deck suits you. You don't even have to put it into paper or proxy everything out. Just throw it into Moxfield, use the hand tester, and just walk through a few turns. See if it seems like something you want to try against an opponent. Then you can hop on Spell Table or some other digital platform. You can even do it through Discord. Try it out there, see if it works well against other people. And then if you do really like it, you can proxy it up, print it at the Staples or a library or whatever you want, throw that into sleeves, and just get your reps in on actually playing the deck. Maybe do a couple. If your friends aren't into cEDH, it's easy enough to print up 3 or 4 decks and give that a shot. There's 100 posts on Reddit about 4 cEDH decks that are evenly matched against each other. And if I'm being honest, you can probably pick any 4 cEDH decks that placed reasonably high in any tournament, and they should be reasonably well matched. Obviously, there's certain metagame picks that go into this, but don't worry about that right now. For now, just try it out, see if you find a deck that clicks, a deck that you enjoy top to bottom. And if there is something that's a little bit off, you can fix it later. I'm going to go right to left, your left to right, through the decks that I have in front of me that are in various stages of proxying and specialization. The first is what I call my poo deck. This is a Rog Tevesh deck. And I play this deck unsleeved. It's just a series of proxies. They all are real magic art, real magic cards. But the whole deck is proxied, so you can riffle, shuffle, you can take this anywhere. You're not too scared about these cards getting a little bit scuffed up. But this deck comes packing land destruction. It's got a really cool core of big splashy spells that destroy stuff. We have Obliterate, we have Ruination. We just make our opponent's day a little bit worse. And it's a little bit too slow to keep up with some cEDH decks, but it does a pretty good job of hanging in those mid-range battles, and it can force through a lot more than you'd think. It plays kind of a Rakdos Super Friends type strategy, and it's a lot of fun to play. But this isn't going to make any friends. And in cEDH, you don't really care. The goal is to build those competitive decks, and having a couple on you that you can switch up if the matchup is really poor is kind of important. So when I started putting cEDH decks together, I wanted to make sure that I had a bit of a variety. So instead of this heavy lockdown control list, I also have my Gitrog monster list. This was the first cEDH deck that I built. It is very combo-centric. Essentially, there's a loop with Dakmor Salvage and Gitrog monster that allows you to draw cards whenever you want. And because of that, your discard pile, deck, and hand are kind of all the same zone. So if you think about the way that interacts, you can cast Dark Ritual as many times as you want. You can continuously draw through all of the cards in your deck, and there's a variety of ways of winning that don't involve adding suboptimal cards to the deck. It's a really tight list, and I rather enjoy it. The other benefit of the Gitrog monster is that most opponents don't know how the combo works, so occasionally you can sneak in a win when you otherwise wouldn't be able to. In cEDH, there's no strict obligation to explain how your deck works before it starts working, so there's definitely an opportunity to sneak in some plays that would otherwise be considered gauche in other brackets. But if we're sticking on the combo game plan, I also have my 5-color soup deck, and you'll notice that it comes in 2 deck boxes, and that's because this is actually 2 decks in 1. This is my Terra, Magical Adept, and Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck. Now they work fairly similarly, but the important part is that they are both 5 colors. This means we can play Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, and all of those lines with all of the tutors to support to completely win on the spot through Thassa's Oracle. And also, we can run breach lines that allow us to repeatedly cast Lion's Eye Diamond and Brain Freeze from the graveyard to mill ourselves out before casting Thassa's Oracle. Alternatively, both of these commanders have their own combo lines. Terra with Food Chain, repeatedly milling your deck, and then going into Perforos to repeatedly cast Squee for infinite damage. Scion of the Ur-Dragon, feeding 6 mana into it to find a couple of dragons, get a Hoarding Broodlord loop with Sacrifice to repeatedly add infinite black mana to your mana pool, all under the protection of a copy of Dromoka. So the decks are fairly similar in the way that they overlap. They're only about 15 to 20 cards different from each other, and those 15 to 20 cards live in this extra deck box. So at any moment, I can swap between them and functionally have 2 decks in 1. The fourth and a half deck that I have with me here is my Azorius deck. And right now I have Rarity as the commander. I think if I were to play it for real, it would be Lies Hexed, because for the most part I care about the discount, and it applies to a lot of different artifact combos and other things that we can do with the deck, feeding into an Aetherflux Reservoir for enough damage to off the table. With Lies Hexed, you can apply a little bit of combat pressure as well, and it's just a very flexible white-blue permission turbo deck. And finally, I have a deck that I can't actually bring to a tournament. Not because of anything about the construction itself, but because of the way that it plays. And this is my Esper Lockdown deck. It's the deck that has entirely Batman proxies in it. I've made the entire deck out of art from the Long Halloween, and I have a second deck box that is entirely tokens because my commander is Inquisitor Greyfax from the Warhammer 40k series. Alternatively, I can swap this out with Marneus Calgar, or Rafine, or Tivit, and I have a variety of other cards in this sideboard that allow me to tailor the deck, depending on which commander I pick. But you can see, depending on what deck you play, you can lean very heavily into those combo lines, or you can back off, take more of a control approach, or a lockdown approach. Or occasionally, you can do something very unique, going with something like Magda, that doesn't use 70 to 80% of the cards that you would see on average in a cEDH deck. If you were to take the top 20 to 30 decks in cEDH at any given tournament, I'd guarantee that they have a good probably 40% overlap, just looking at the different fetch lands and artifact mana and fast combo pieces, especially given some of the overlapping partner commanders, with Thrasios being in a number of lists, Rugrak being in a variety of lists, and some of these others like Timna and Crom showing up in a variety of different structures. It is an open format, but ultimately there are only so many good cards that have been printed that work against 3 opponents. I mentioned before that I can't play this Esper deck in a tournament, and the reason is because I'm not sure I can close out a game in under 75-80 minutes. It takes a while to get going, and once it does finally put the screws on, it takes a while to actually win. So this deck is probably just a little bit too slow for that if your opponents aren't willing to concede on the spot. And that brings us back to the tournament setting. How do we apply these skills at a cEDH event? So when we start talking about cEDH events, it's extremely important to understand the format going into it. what it takes to make day 2, the way that they're going to cut things down, and the way that the different rounds are going to function. Usually they give you about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes for the game itself, and then it goes to turns. Each person gets one additional turn before the game closes out. Some tournaments have started having a hard cap on that extra turn cycle, so it just doesn't go too long. And then, after a few rounds, they'll probably sift down the number of people in the active event. Occasionally there will be side events and other things going on, but they'll usually state that up front. My friends and I a few days ago just went to a cEDH tournament in San Diego. The Fishbowl 6, my understanding is that it is the largest cEDH event on the West Coast ever. I was running the Gitrog monster, and it was a ton of fun. But the way that they handled it was, in order to make it to day 2 from the first 5 rounds in day 1, is that you needed to have 6 points. The way they were scoring is 5 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. So in order to make it to the next day, you had to at least win 1 game and then draw a second. You'll find that as you play through the rounds, people are more and more willing to draw if you can present a situation where you're king-making. If you're in the position where you can stop one person but not the other and nobody else has an answer, it's usually the right answer to draw the game and at least get a point for everybody than for one person to choose the winner, because that just feels a little bad. So because of that, the negotiation on the table becomes extremely important. When you're playing a regular competitive Magic event, head-to-head, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're probably not going to talk too much about your opponent while you're sitting at the table facing only your opponent. But if there's 2 other people there pointing out what combo pieces do what, and identifying how many pieces of interaction they probably have and how many pieces of interaction you might have, could be important to really suss out whether you're going to be able to stop that Kinnan player from popping off, or identify if that Timna Crom player is getting a little too far ahead. Being able to identify the specific board state while you were playing the game is extremely important, but because of that, it's a collaborative exercise. Everybody's trying to do the same thing. Everybody's trying to identify who's about to win. And playing some of these more esoteric decks can be a blessing and a curse. I can sneak some wins with Gitrog that I otherwise probably shouldn't, but also, people are afraid of a lot of my cards just because they don't know what they do. Is 6 a combo piece? I mean, sort of, if I have 3 other cards to support it. Will Wild Mongrel win the game on the spot? Only if I have the other pieces in my hand. But, because of that, they tend to blow them up anyways. So when you're playing a stranger cEDH deck, you have to be a little bit careful with people hating down your pieces before you have a chance to even get going. And sometimes they'll waste their interaction on you while someone else is going for the win. So my advice, if you are playing in a cEDH event, if you actually want to dive into this format, and you've picked a deck that you enjoy, and you've played it enough that you understand how your deck works, is just to talk at the table. There's this impulse to be quiet when you are playing Magic. But I'd encourage you to state every card you're playing, explain what the Oracle text says, and be open about identifying when you see your opponents are starting to get a little too far ahead. You don't have to say it directly, you just have to ask them. How many cards do you have in your hand again? Oh, 9? That's a lot. Cool. And you're going to be untapping with 7 mana. Dang. You already have a Smothering Tithe in play? That means you're probably going to make, what, 3 or 4 treasure tokens before it gets back to you? Just by identifying some of these points on the table, you can make sure that the game plays fairly, and that nobody's able to sneak in a win when they otherwise shouldn't. To actually win a round in a cEDH tournament is pretty challenging. And I'll admit the biggest difficulty with playing in a cEDH event like this is the turn order. There's a big difference between going first and going fourth. But, like everything else, going first is a double-edged sword. You're the first person who has the opportunity to get to that turn 3 breakpoint that a lot of decks have where you can go for the win. But if you do, and they stop you, Seat 2 is looking like they're in a really good position to close it out. The problem is in Seat 4, it doesn't always make it all the way around. And if the game does grind down to where we start getting into turn 4, 5, 6, you're still going to feel that disadvantage from those early turns. And ultimately, this is where knowing your opponent's deck really kicks in. If you have that experience of playing against a lot of other players that all play very unique strategies or different meta strategies, you might be going into a tournament knowing how to respond to everything. But chances are there's going to be a couple wild cards that catch you out. In my experience at Fishbowl, I played against a mono green 6 deck. I played Rakdos Rowan. I played 5-color Luris combo. I played a 3-color Bruce Tarl Kamal deck. There was a whole variety of these different unique strategies and weird builds that just had strange win conditions that went against the norm, that weren't the usual Thassa's Oracle, mill out your library type line. There was a Tayam player that I played against that comboed off on the stack over multiple pieces of interaction. Just really spectacular play. And I think in some cases, the only way to learn that is by losing to it. And so by playing in these events, you can gain that experience. But by workshopping ahead of time and just being a part of the community and playing it out, you can go a long ways towards knowing how to respond to all of these situations when the rubber hits the road. So I would encourage you to give it a shot. Go test a few decks. Put together a list, find something that works like something you already enjoy. There's a variety of different win strategies and win conditions out there, and right now it looks like the meta is more open than ever. Ultimately, the day was carried in the Fishbowl by a Dargo Timna deck that I had never seen in paper before, and it was a real sight to behold. Just really cool, really great experience, and if you do proxy up some of these cEDH decks and try it with your friends, I'd love to hear how it goes. Because I guarantee some people it is going to click, and they are going to absolutely adore playing this competitive format. And others, maybe not so much. And that's okay. I think one of the cool things about Magic is the ability to recognize which formats are for you, which brackets are for you, and which decks are for you. And be able to find a love of this game in that thing that you enjoy doing, in the way that works for you, with the community that works for you. I just want to make sure that people don't get left behind. That for somebody that would love cEDH to never try it is a tragedy. It's been really nice talking to you.